Hi, I'm Linda Powell and this is our lesson 3 of pattern cutting. I teach pattern cutting at Morley College and today I want to do this simple one seam coat, which some people also know as the bog coat. The principle of the coat, if you look here at the little pattern I got from the V&A, it's also on my Instagram, that helps you to understand the principle of having one flat seam, one flat piece of fabric that folds in to give you a body and a sleeve. The difference between the coat we're doing is we're going to take a section away to be able to put a front band in. But the principle of one flat piece of fabric being folded and cut to give you sleeves and a body is in this pattern. Now for what we're going to draft, we're only going to draft one half of the pattern and this part will be on the fold line. So we'll start. Now we start with our centre back seam. Just draw a line. So this line will represent centre back, and if your fabric is wide enough it will be the fold line. Right, now the fabric for this pattern is 140 centimetres wide, so I'm going to make the half pattern 70 centimetres wide. This will also include a seam allowance, which I'll explain as we go along. So we square our first top line. Next line is the width of the sleeve. In this case it's 35 centimetres, so I'll mark 35 centimetres to represent the shoulder and 35 centimetres the other side of the sleeve, and for both of them I'll square across to here. There we go. There's our shoulder line, and then 35 centimetres again, square across the other side of the sleeve here. And the hem we measure from the shoulder for this coat 100 centimetres, from the shoulder again 100 centimetres, and join the line. There we go. Hem, and I'm going to measure across the 70 centimetres. 70, 70, 70 again, and we'll join all these lines up. Don't be afraid to draw the lines longer, because then in this instance when we add a hem we've got our lines in place. There we go. Right, that's the complete outline of the fabric you'll need. And then we start with, going to cut a piece out for going round the neck for the band to fit in. So take a 5 centimetre line from the top edge to the shoulder line and just shape gently so that it sits nicely around your neck. Now And that same 5 centimetres, I'm going to put a marker here, and you'll see why in a second. Now, before anything else, I'm going to add a 1 centimetre seam allowance around the neck so that we can sew on the neckband. And I'll just follow it round like this. Here. And because our material is 140 centimetres wide, this bit gets cut away by the way, I'm going to also mark on here a seam allowance, so it'll help us with our measuring. On all these lines I'm going to mark the 1 centimetre seam allowance that will help us to sew on the band. Like that. And while we're here, I'm going to add 4 centimetres, or you can do less. I like a decent hem. I can't see where the 4 is. There we go. Right, there's our hem. Okay, now let's cut the neck away. Here, and let's cut the top of the pattern. Like that. Now, when this sleeve folds over to meet the seam, the one seam, we need to allow 1 centimetre each side for sewing. You can do a slightly smaller seam, but let's say 1 centimetre. So that's ready. Now before I measure for the band, let's show where the side seam is going to end up. So from the seam allowance on the front edge to the marker that the 5 centimetres in from the centre back on this pattern comes to 64 centimetres. So the halfway is 32. So if I square down now, I'll use the black. If I square down here, this marker will now represent where we will fold for the side seam. So I'll call it side seam, even though it's just a fold. It represents the position. The next thing we need to do, this part here is the back body, this part is the front body. Let's call that front. We need to mark where we want the flap and the pocket to go in. So let's do it roughly halfway. So if there we go, here's our halfway. So the flap I've done 19, which is 9.5 here and here. So let's do the flap. It can be whatever you choose. Let's call it 7 centimetres. 7. There's our flap, and that will tuck into the seam. And then for the pocket, you want the flap to cover the edge of the pocket. So let's come in 0.5 centimetre inside the flap, and let's go down to, I've done mine 19. Let's mark 19 here, and we do the same here, exactly 0.5 centimetre inside, and then let's just measure that more accurately. There's our 19. So the red represents the pocket, and I've allowed for it to be sewn under the seam like that. Okay, so for the band we need to measure the back neck. Now any curve you will need to measure by standing the tape measure up. So if I stand on the sewing line, so if I stand the tape measure up here, it comes to, it's 39.5, yeah, here we go, 39.5 cm. But what we know is we're going to need to take away 1 centimetre because of it being sewn in here. So I'm just going to mark the centimetre allowance. So in actual fact we need 38.5 for the neck part, and then we need 65 centimetres up to the seam allowance. Okay, so for our band we need 65 band, in this instance 65 plus 38.5 equals 0.5, 13, 6 and 4 is 10, yeah? Yeah, 103.5. So I'm going to turn the paper round. By the way, this bit gets cut to the side seam point. Right. Turn this round so it's easy for me to do. Well, the band is just 3 lines. Draw your first line, which is the fold line edge. Here. And then do 5 centimetres. Well, if we include the seam allowance, let's go for 6, and then we'll mark the seam allowance inside. 6, 6, 6 this way, and then 6, 6, 6. Square the top neck, and that's our centre back neck. And now to show the seam allowance, I'm going to mark it at the centre back neck, at the side seam here, like this. And then we're going to measure from the seam allowance the amount we measured here, which I said was 103.5. So there's 100, and then 3.5. That's the length of our band. I'll do it. And then that needs a seam allowance on top, and we've already got seam allowance allowed on the side seam. So this is the fold line of the band. And you would cut to plus fusing. Right, now, so that you can see I'm going to cut this away to separate it from the main body so that you can see it as a separate pattern. The flap you've got a pattern for. You can just add seam allowance to it. There's your band, cut it out neater. I'll cut the hem on the line. Right, now this is the line that you will need to cut to the side seam line. Yes, your pocket flap, when you've made it, will be stitched against the edge in preparation for when the seam is sewn, and your pocket itself with seam allowances and turnings will be positioned on the front body, and then you will fold. Maybe I'll just, so that you can see it clearer, just cut this edge of the pattern here. So that what happens, this line, this top edge folds onto itself, and then the body part is folded, and you can start to see how this is pinned together. This is where your one seam is, like this here, and once your pocket is on like this is folded to its line. So here you have a seam to the edge of the front, and then that's continued separately to give you the sleeve part. And then your band, which we've just drawn, will be attached from the hem round to the back neck. And then what I've done in this one, because the fabric is double-sided, I've simply folded the hem to the outside rather than inside, and folded the top edge in. And that is your one seam coat, or your bob coat. It's actually very, very easy to make, and I hope you enjoy making it.